Welcome to Keen on Green with Evan Rigsby, the podcast that dives deep into the world of environmental consulting from a multitude of perspectives. Join your host, Evan Rigsby, as he explores the intricate challenges and innovative solutions within the environmental sector.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 12 of Keen on Green. We got a very special edition where for both of us here, we're going through some warm and cold times. I'm recording this right now from Connecticut, and we're dealing with ice, but also some warm coming up. But without further ado, I have a very special guest to bring on today. Daniel Duncan is joining me today, and definitely comes from a different background. Over the past few episodes, I have had a lot of our viewers requesting, Evan, I would love to get someone who's come from university going into consulting and see their experiences. But Daniel is someone special. You know, he is a D1 student athlete. You know, he's a captain over there at Rutgers, leading their track and field team. You know, Daniel also comes from Princeton University and even from his high school, graduating valedictorian. The reason I brought Daniel on is Daniel comes from an interesting background where we'll get into it, but I think his story into environmental consulting is a little bit untraditional and showing along the way some of the mentors he's talked with, you know, companies he's interacted with, and ultimately how that led him to where he is today. So without further ado, Daniel, thank you.
Thank you. Excited to be here. Thank you.
So without further ado, I mean, I want to really jump into the sports side there. And personally, I'm biased. I love, you know, talking with athletes, even here when we're hiring folks on the recruiting side. I think that's a great trait in life. Talk a little bit about, you know, obviously at Rutgers, but also your time at Princeton too, and you know, a little bit of the sports side there.
Yeah, so I do track and field. I've been a Division I athlete for 6 years. I always joke and say I really was a baseball player early on in high school, and I took a break for a year, and I was like, let me just do track to keep myself active. And I'm still on break, so I can go back to baseball anytime, I swear. But, you know, it's been a journey. Coming out of high school, I had a pretty good amount of schools trying to recruit me. I went on visits to Princeton, Brown, Harvard, and then for my non-Ivy Leagues, I went to Florida State and Maryland. So I went to a couple different schools, very different places. Ended up settling at Princeton because of the coaches there and the culture they have. Um, and, you know, but unfortunately, my freshman year was COVID, so I ended up not running my freshman year and getting an extra year of eligibility back.
Mhm.
And then I guess jumping a little bit forward, I came to Rutgers because I had that extra year of eligibility. So they gave me an opportunity to run here and, you know, take advantage, get a degree, and finish strong with my career. So it's been a very interesting journey, but there's a lot to unpack there.
So let's go back a little bit because I think COVID was such a weird time for everybody. And it was like, I think the world got turned upside down. And, you know, what was that like for you? I mean, not only with sports, but in general with everything. Like, how was it like navigating that? Because that must have been weird for you too.
Yeah, like I guess pre-COVID, was it for now, my generation, pre-AI, like everything was different.
Yeah.
And I ended up, it was what, around like February or March when like they started lockdown. So I kind of
Yep.
lost my senior outdoor season track wise. And then academically, that's when we started getting on Zoom and Google Meet. And pretty much the majority of my collegiate experience academically and athletically have been kind of virtual. So it's very interesting, especially now, 6 years later, everything's kind of closer back to in person. So I think it was really just learning how to navigate and connect with people over mediums like this. That was
Yep.
just such a hard skill to learn, such a large learning curve for me.
No, and I totally agree with you. I remember even doing, you know, pretty much all interviews at that time on our side was all virtual and, you know, and all that. So I think one of the things that I get asked a lot, and I want to pick your brain here, is that I have a lot of people who are starting out, sort of in your case, and don't have a name yet, maybe really haven't put anything out there. Um, but I think a big trait I love about you is that you're a very proactive guy. And I think a lot with like sports too, and that's kind of why I introed with it is, as you know, sports there's win and loss. I mean, that's life. There's win and loss, there's work with the team dynamic. I mean, especially from your captain's perspective, and I'm sure a lot of that goes back in there too, of, hey, there's going to be weird stuff that happens in life. There's going to be good stuff. There's going to be bad stuff, but it's how you react to it. It's how you kind of take charge with it. How did that kind of, how did that lead you to environmental? I know how did you kind of navigate that? Who were you reaching out to? I mean, how were you kind of getting started and being like, hey, this is something that I might want to go for there?
Yeah, I mean that was a really big lesson for me going through college. I'm
Yep.
I'm an introvert, so I don't when I talk with people, I guess it does really tire me out. So I guess my whole approach to networking was, I think my whole approach was wrong to begin with. I saw it
Yep.
very transactional. I saw it as something that you do to get to somewhere, but it really started to change once I began to realize like networking can just be about being curious, talking to people, learning about how they got into where they've gone, and asking about their experiences. Because you can always learn about something you've never done through talking to through other people's experience. But this
Mm.
whole journey kind of started with the class I took in my master's program. It was a principles and communication and leadership course, and there was an
Okay.
assignment, and basically, the assignment was they wanted you to go and have a 45-minute conversation with anybody, as high as a CEO or as low as your parents, and just have a detailed conversation, come with questions prepared, and talk about leadership and their experiences. And that assignment was really eye-opening for me because in just doing it, I mean, I just learned so much about different uh, different jobs and occupations. Like I talked to a wildlife photographer because at the time I was like, maybe I'll do some wildlife photography. I ended up
Yep.
talking to a senior project scientist at HDR, which was my first look into environmental consulting. And then I ended up talking to some professor in academia. And in all those cases, I'm very thankful I had those conversations because I learned so much about not only what I like, but what I don't like. And that was just that started me rolling, and now I'm here.
So I'm gonna push on that a little bit, and I think one of the things that's interesting you said is that it could be from anything, like wildlife photography, and then a conversation just starts from there, and and all that. Tell me more about the class. What caught your interest? Because I know, with consulting, there's a lot of different areas like remediation and eco work and all these different things. Were there certain parts of that class where it was like, okay, I want to learn more about this?
I so the degree I'm doing at Rutgers is the Master's of Business Science. So it's the
Okay.
idea is you're taking people with a lot of scientific background and giving them, I guess, general managerial skills to communicate that science. I mean, that's
Yep.
probably one of the best quotes I've heard from this program is like, great science isn't done until it's communicated. And when I had that conversation with the senior project scientist at HDR, I just learned about like how much specifically in remediation work, communication is key. It doesn't matter how well you can walk a site. It doesn't matter how well you can analyze certain things you send to labs. If you can't communicate risk to clients, I mean, your
Mm.
science is worthless. And I think that class really taught me like it's really important to take time to learn how to communicate and be able to distill, vast scientific knowledge into something your clients can understand. Because that's really what it's about. It's about communicating and uh, you know giving assistance to your clients.
Well, I think that kind of ties in, going back to the sports, and maybe you can kind of chime in on that. I mean, I was a sports guy myself, and sort of the same thing. I mean, you are constantly putting people here, doing stuff, or like, hey, we got to pivot it out a little bit. When you were talking, going back to HDR and kind of seeing, hey, there's PMs, there's APMs, there's field people, there's principals. I mean, you have all these moving parts, and you have clients. Any similarities you kind of saw from some of those early days of kind of seeing how some of these companies operate, seeing some of your sports days? Was there like a lot of relatability there?
I think, and a very, very specific to my experience. So being a captain at Princeton and being captain at Rutgers is very different. At
Yep.
Princeton, there's no scholarships. Obviously, everybody's very academically inclined, very hardworking.
Right.
And at Rutgers, there's scholarships. People are here. The talent is just much higher. So it's very different cultures. And learning to be a captain at both has taught me like sometimes to be the best captain in the situation, I have to lean into it more, be a bit more active. Sometimes the best thing I can do is to lean back and let people do what they do best. So I think
Hmm.
then speaking with project managers, principals, field workers, at every level, the type of communication that's necessary is different. Um, but what I've been told and what I'm hearing over and over again is the ability to navigate these differences is what makes the difference between someone who's, just good and someone who's great in this field. So that's something that I really think translates really well for this type of work.
What was something that surprised you though? One of the things I was kind of curious on is like I remember myself, I cut my teeth, on the recruiting side with remediation. That was my niche. But I remember kind of first learning about it and then actually talking with folks and being like, oh wow, it's actually this. Oh, you're right, this is what a project looks like. This is what a site looks like. Um, I'm curious, kind of for you so far, would have been some things like that have been kind of surprising to you? Like maybe some things where you thought it worked this way, you saw it in class this way, whatever. But, now that you've started talking with folks, it's like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't see it that way.
I think, specifically in a state like New Jersey, there's so many layers to it. And I think that's why I'm really excited about this type of work.
Yep.
On the regulatory side, I remember, with my industry mentors learning about ASTM standard, for example, and then having to
Yep.
boil that down into New Jersey, where it's different because of the way things are managed by LSRPs, and then also trying to learn how they get it done in New York. Like every state has something that's a little bit different, and it's important that you understand these differences to be able to do your work effectively. Um,
Yep.
but I think also, you know, I mean, my background's in ecology, so, I'm interested in environmental sciences, but I just didn't know how much work there is in this field. Like, I didn't, like, there's remediation sites, or, federal remediation sites that are literally near where I grew up, and I had no clue.
Yep.
I guess just understanding, like, not only will there be a lot of work in the future, but there's already a lot of work happening right now, and I just had zero clue. It's just crazy how much stuff is going on that I'm starting to become aware of right now.
Well, it's funny. I remember even myself, and when I first started learning about Superfund sites and some of these other programs, and I'm like, there are some really close to me, and that's something I like totally missed. And you got a good point. I mean, like, yeah, the work is similar, but how you do work in Jersey versus New York City, for example, that's different. And I guess off that, we've kind of talked offline. I mean, there's different organizations like the LSRPA group and, some of these other organizations. Are you learning about those now? Are you talking with, some folks in that? What's kind of your take on that? Because I think organizations, even outside of the classroom, play a huge part in networking.
Yeah. So I joined the LSRPA, I want to say in September. I went to a career fair here at Rutgers, and
Okay.
I met with someone at, I want to say, Geosyntech, and they encouraged me to apply to one of their scholarships. Now, even I didn't end up getting it, but I ended up having so many conversations with LSRPs across probably 10 different companies in New
Wow.
Jersey. I guess a tip for any, youngsters watching, cold emails really work. If you approach it the right way, you can ask for a nice 10 to 15 minute conversation over the phone. And
Yep.
the wealth of knowledge I was able to extract just from those conversations and learning about people's careers and career paths, just life changing. I mean, even to the point of like going into interviews and the recruiting side of things, like the way in which I understand landscape environment of consulting is just different if I had not, or if I had not had those conversations previously. But back to the LSRPA, I was able to meet different people on the board as well, and just really learn about the different advantages being a part of that organization has. I mean, they have people who will look over your resume. They have tips and tricks of different types of certifications you should pursue, and there's a lot of extra content in there that being a member helps. And I think if I was just going to be a student and be academic about it, there's no way. I don't think I would have been prepared for the job search as I would have been now. So it was a blessing to really dive deep into the LSRPA.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you said something that I want to ask there, and you talked about the power of the cold email. And I think that's something that is so underrated, with cold outreach. I'm biased being on the recruiting side myself, but I think there's a lot of it where even for someone in your position, being able to talk with others, see what they're doing, see what, like we just talked about, what companies are doing. But I think there's a big misconception that people are in a lot of ways scared to, particularly, younger folks where I've heard stuff where it's like, I don't know. I don't want to bother them. I don't want to rub someone the wrong way. But I kind of see it the other way, and it sounds like you do too, where it's like there are so many people, if you ask, that are willing to give their time. And I think it's great that you're on the podcast here because you're a living example of that. So I'm going to go a little deeper there. Talk more about that because I wasn't sure if you even felt that yourself when you were starting to send those out. And then, a big thing that I've realized is that people will give the time if you ask.
Yeah, so I will say like that's exactly how I started. I was like, I don't want to bother people. Like, what if I don't know. I was like, what if I'm not interested enough to talk? Or what if, why would this principal really spend time talking to me about certain things? And
Right.
to people watching, I just ask you to just start with one conversation. Maybe it'll take 5 emails, but just start with one conversation. I'm telling you, it'll be worthwhile. You'll learn just how much people are willing to help, especially in this economy, in this job market. Like people genuinely want to impart a lot of their wisdoms, a lot of their mistakes,
Yep.
um, and particularly if you approach the conversation, like I said before, being curious, asking about them and understanding, their perspectives, I think that will go a long way. Um, but yeah, after that one conversation, it just changed my brain chemistry, and
Yep.
now I really look forward to having these coffee chats. Like it's something that I really enjoy, like just learning more about different people doing different things in the same space you are. Like it's super interesting.
No, I agree with you, and I think don't get me wrong. There's a fantastic wealth of knowledge in academia and tests and learning and learn and all this stuff. But I think when you can talk with someone offline and they really open up and hey, here's what I'm doing, here's what a day in the life. I mean, you get so much more out of it, and and all that. Um, I mean, where's your head at, guy? I mean, it's going to be wrapping up for the warmer months coming up and kind of a new chapter is very soon for you, and you know, kind of what's exciting for you. I mean, what are you excited for this next chapter there?
Yeah, I mean, oof, what should I say? I mean, first I'm blessed. I started this kind of job search a year ago. And I guess for people who don't know, I actually reached out to Evan about a year ago, and I asked him honestly, like, what's your perspective on the industry? Like, how can I learn? And he was really helpful. He spoke with me for over 25 minutes, and we talked about, different things like the E&R magazine, like how I can figure out what kind of companies fall into my niche or my interests, and just following that advice, that's how I ended up, I networked with specifically New Jersey, Langen, um, Arcadis, WSP, HDR, Geosyntech, like you really put me on that track. And now, having these conversations, be able to understand, what's the type of work I should expect in an early career role. I was able
Mhm.
to find a role where my future bosses are willing to kind of cater to my interests, not just remediation, but I say I'm also interested in GIS because that's a skill I picked up,
Mm,
or I'm also interested in
mm-hmm,
wetland delineation. You know, they're
mm-hmm,
they're allowing me to have that free reign because they really believe in the vision I have for my own career. And
mm-hmm,
you know,
mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a great time to say, thank you, Evan. I really appreciate you helping me out. And it's really life changing what you did. You know, just a short conversation, and it turned into this. So I'm very thankful.
Well, I say right back at you, and one of the reasons I'm super glad you're on the podcast is you are in a good way persistent, my friend. You are someone who is not going to wait for life to come to them. You go and get it, and that's a trait I've loved about you. I'm going to ask a question quick that I think a lot of people don't ask, and you talk about the opportunities, the doors that have opened up. You talked about the networking. You talked about all that. How have you dealt with rejection? Because I think that's the ugly side that you don't see on the internet, and I think that's a big part of it. And you know, I think one thing that's great about you is that no matter what, you reach out, you open doors, you talk with people. I think that's such a great trait. But when you were kind of going through your job search, I mean, how did you kind of deal with rejection? How did you deal with people not getting back? I mean, how did you navigate that part of it?
I think, you know, that's where like being a Division One athlete for 6 years really helps.
Yep.
A lot of resilience. My junior year at Princeton, I suffered a grade 3 hamstring tear. Pretty much for most people in track and field, that's a career ender.
Yeah.
And when I went to the doctors, they pretty much told me I'd never run the same again. Um, but it took a lot from me, getting to that point. Obviously, I was valedictorian in high school. I was really fast, and then all of a sudden, that's also when Princeton starts to get really hard. You start doing a thesis and everything. I was
Right.
struggling academically. I was struggling athletically and with my health. Um, it was honestly a really big life-changing moment. I think I felt a lot of my ego kind of die a bit. Um, but through that experience, I think I was able to discover, you know, a desire to fail. I mean, it was weird. It was the first time I felt like I was a failure in my life, like a really big failure. But
Hmm.
in order to get over that feeling, I decided to fail more. For example, like I said, I was an introvert, pretty shy, so I made sure, on Nassau Street at Princeton, I would just go talk to strangers, kind of overcome certain
Hmm.
fears, and
Hmm.
that kind of
Hmm.
thing helped build me over time. And then I applied to a bunch of different schools when I was in my recruiting journey for my grad school year. A couple coaches, pulled some scholarships away from me, but that never really
Hmm.
got me down. And then even coming here at Rutgers, I've suffered some injuries, so I think it's really just I've just built a tolerance for like resilience. It's really failure is something like sometimes I look forward to. I mean, you just never know, like especially in you know the professional space. A lot of times if you try to do something and it doesn't work, you're exactly where you started. But if you do get that one opportunity, if you do get that one chance, it could be life changing. So I think that's what I think it's like. You know, I don't really bank on outcomes. Like if it happens, it happens. But if it
Hmm.
does happen, like man, that'd be awesome. And if it doesn't, I'm okay. I'm still the same person at the end of the day. I'll still go to sleep the same.
Exactly. And obviously it's not for everybody. I agree with you so much. I mean, that door opening, you never know where it's going to take you, and and stuff. Last question for you, kind of off that. There have been some wonderful people who have helped you along the way, and you talk about some mentors and people you've talked at companies, and I think it's always great to recognize or call out or even point people to any, doesn't even have to be a mentor, but it could even be like a resource if that's easier. But any mentors that have really stood out to you, any teachers or resources or programs that, you know, were really meaningful for your life? And I figured I'd ask you there.
I think I think three really comes to mind. Um, when I was younger, I won an award named after Paul Robeson, who was called the
Hmm.
Renaissance Man. He went to Rutgers, and he was born. in Princeton. So I feel like I have a lot of connection to that person, and then that award in society. Every year I get to go back and speak with people about, what it means to be a Renaissance person, what it means to value not only education, but athletics, the arts, and,
Hmm.
embody that as a whole. Like that's something I think changed my perspective on everything.
Hmm.
Um, and then academically, I'd probably say Professor Livet. He's the professor for the communications and research course I took. I mean,
Hmm.
he was the first big push for me into networking. I really was not a believer at all. I was scared.
Yep.
I wasn't really, like I said, I just wasn't really, I didn't want to bother people. But he was that first push to say, okay, well, you never know. Go be curious. Go learn something. And, I mean, it's changed my perspective on everything. And then lastly, it'd be like my coaches, like Coach Abdullah at Princeton. He's the one who recruited me. He's the only coach who ever came to one of my track meets in person when I was in high school. So, just a stand-up guy. Obviously he recruits some of the best athletes in the country, academically and athletically. And then he just produces men. A culture of men is what we are at Princeton, and
Yep.
just bless all these different forces have just made me to who I am today, and just thankful. Um, oh, and I guess on the LSRP side, Sonia Ward, she's on the board. Yeah, she was just an amazing
Oh,
help.
Sonia's great.
Yeah, she didn't have to talk to me. She always communicates quickly in the emails. She's
Yep.
willing to talk to me about different positions at Tetra Tech specifically and learning more about
Yep.
what that company is about. Just like amazing. She's just an amazing person. It was just awesome.
Oh my God, Sonia's awesome, and and stuff. But I think that's a great place to kind of end it. And I agree with you. And specifically what your professor said, I think, like even myself coming out of university, I felt like the world was like, this, and then you start talking with people and it keeps going bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And, and all that. But even with your coach, I think there's an inherent trait there of, showing up in person, meeting
Mhm.
people, shaking their hands and and all that. But what I'd love to do, if it's okay with you, with guys, as we end this episode, I would love to tag your LinkedIn. If there's viewers that are interested and want to reach out to you, would that be all right?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay. Well, Daniel, I appreciate you being on here, guy, and to all our viewers, I will make sure to tag him in as we put this episode out there and. Literally based off the advice he said, do not hesitate to reach out. But Daniel, thanks for being on here, guy.
Thanks for having me, Evan.